Story 51. My wife decided to go on a trip with her sorority sisters. I'm a 29-year-old male, married to my wife Sarah, who is a 29-year-old female. We've been married for 5 years and have a daughter named Emma, who is 6. I'll try to recount as much of the conversation as I can recall. I still remember the conversation. It started off as an ordinary evening when Sarah casually mentioned over dinner that she and some of her old college friends were planning a trip to Europe. Sarah said, "I really need this." Then, she went on to say that her friends Lindsay, Amy, and Jessica were all in for the trip and that it had been years since they had any real time together. She claimed they used to talk about doing something like this back when they were in the sorority. Her words hung in the air between us. I dreaded the implications I knew were buried underneath. Our daughter Emma was in the next room, playing with her toys, oblivious to the tension that had quickly settled over the table. "You need this?" I repeated, trying to mask the disbelief in my voice. "What about me? What about Emma? You're going to leave for 2 weeks, Sarah. Europe's not just a weekend trip. I have to work. Have you thought of what we'll need to do for a babysitter?" She sighed, and I could already feel the conversation slipping away from me like sand through my fingers. Sarah had always been headstrong and had the ability to bulldoze through conversations, making me feel like the unreasonable one. She just dismissed my concern with a "You'll be fine. It's not like you've never taken care of Emma before. You can always extend daycare to cover the full workday. And besides, this is important to me. We all need a break sometimes. You can manage for a couple of weeks, right?" There it was. The question that wasn't really a question. The right? At the end wasn't seeking my agreement, only my acceptance. What choice did I have? Say no and be the bad guy? I knew what would happen if I tried to argue. I'd be accused of holding her back, of not supporting her desire for some temporary independence, for a momentary escape from the responsibilities of marriage and motherhood. I told her that I didn't think it was the right time, and it seemed out of the blue. I hated the way my voice sounded. I didn't want to deal with the drama if I pushed her too hard. She looked at me across the table, giving me the look, her eyes narrowed slightly as if I had just made the most unreasonable request in the world. "Tom, I've decided," she said firmly. "We've already booked the tickets. The trip is happening. I need you to be okay with this." And that was it. The conversation was over before it even began. She was going, and I'd be the one staying behind, holding down the fort, taking care of Emma, and trying to figure out how I became the afterthought in my marriage yet again. The morning Sarah left was surreal. I stood at the front door, watching her throw her suitcase into the back of Lindsay's car, hug her friends, and laugh like she was a college girl again, carefree and without any responsibilities. I kept Emma occupied in the living room, trying to make her smile, even though I felt this hollow ache growing in my chest. "You okay, Daddy?" Emma asked, her wide blue eyes full of concern, as if she could sense how I was feeling. I'm still surprised how much kids pick up on. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I lied, forcing a smile. "Mommy's just going on a little trip. We're gonna have a fun time together, just you and me." I heard the car engine rev outside, and Sarah said, "Bye, Tom. I'll text when I land." She sounded excited as if she were embarking on some grand adventure. I knew, deep down, something about this trip didn't sit right with me. She didn't even give me or Emma a hug or kiss goodbye. That stung. I watched the car pull out of the driveway, and disappear down the street, and a strange weight settled on my shoulders. I couldn't explain it at the time, but it felt like I was watching something break, something vital to our marriage. I tried to push those thoughts aside for the first couple of days. Emma and I fell into a routine: breakfast, trips to the park, and coloring sessions at the kitchen table. I kept myself busy enough to ignore the gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. But then the texts started coming and the social media posts started showing up from all her friends. At first, they seemed innocent enough. Sarah sent pictures of them sightseeing, laughing in cafes, and sipping wine on cobblestone streets. But one picture made my blood run cold. It was a post by Amy. A group shot of the girls, with one unfamiliar face standing off to the side, just out of focus. A guy, tall and blonde, was wearing a grin that seemed all too familiar. I stared at the image for a long time, the back of my neck tingling as I recognized him. Chris. I hadn't heard that name in years. Chris was Sarah's ex-boyfriend from college, the guy she dated before me. They had been together for almost 3 years, breaking up right before she met me. From what Sarah had told me, he was charming but unreliable, into all sorts of trouble, the kind of guy who never really grew up. I wanted to believe that seeing him again meant nothing to her. I tried to convince myself that it was a coincidence, that maybe he just happened to be in Europe at the same time. But deep down, I knew better. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next few days were torture. I didn't hear much from Sarah, only sporadic messages, and when I did, they felt distant, like she was keeping me at arm's length. I started imagining all the worst-case scenarios like late-night drinks, rekindled chemistry, and secrets shared in private. I hated myself for thinking that way, but I couldn't help it. A couple of days later, the real blow came. It was a message from Amy. It was a picture outside of a nightclub of some sort. This one wasn't just a casual photo, it was a picture of a scantily clad Sarah talking to what looked like police officers, and Chris was sitting on the curb with his hands behind his back. There was an officer standing over him, looking down at him. A while later, there was another post complaining about the cops arresting their friends with a picture of two handcuffed people. One was Chris. The other was Sarah. I felt the air leave my lungs like I'd been punched in the gut. The post went on to explain that Chris had been caught with a large quantity of prescription medication, pills that were not prescribed to him, and Sarah had been arrested along with him as an accomplice. The words blurred in front of me as I tried to make sense of it. It didn't seem real. How could this be happening? How could my wife be arrested in a foreign country with her ex-boyfriend while I sat here taking care of our daughter? I was paralyzed, staring at the screen, not sure what to do next. I thought about trying to call her, demanding an explanation, but it was obvious she wouldn't be able to talk. So I just sat there in the empty house, the sound of Emma playing in the background, oblivious to the disaster unfolding with our family. The weeks that followed were a blur. Sarah's arrest quickly turned into a nightmare. She and Chris were charged with drug trafficking, as the police had discovered a stash of prescription medications in their hotel room. Yep, they were staying in the same room. I eventually got a phone call from my wife. She claimed she didn't know about it and had been caught up in something she had no knowledge of. But the police and courts didn't believe her. She lost her mind when I told her that neither did I, considering all of her lies and cheating on me with Chris. She was stunned to hear that Amy had posted the pictures and that I knew she was staying in the same room as him. She cried and started begging me to do something. I told her that I would and hung up. I filed for divorce while she was still awaiting trial. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I couldn't handle the betrayal, the lies, the fact that she had chosen to reconnect with her ex while I stayed home, taking care of our daughter. I had been more than patient, more than understanding. But this was unforgivable. It took 6 months for the trial to complete. When it was over, Sarah was sentenced to 4 years in prison. 4 years. Chris got a heavier sentence of no less than 10 years. I thought about how long that was and how much would change in that time. Emma would grow up, start school, make friends, and experience so many milestones that Sarah would miss. And I would have to do it alone. In the months after the trial, life started to settle into a new normal. I threw myself into being the best father I could be for Emma, making sure she never felt like she was missing out on anything. I moved out of the old house. It held too many memories of betrayal and abandonment of a marriage that had fallen apart. We found a new home, a place where we could start fresh. It wasn't easy, but I slowly began to heal. I focused on my work and raising my daughter. Eventually, I met someone new. Her name was Rachel. She was everything I hadn't realized I needed. She was kind, patient, and understanding in a way that Sarah had never been. By the time Sarah was released from prison, I had remarried. Emma was happy and well-adjusted, thriving in her new school, and Rachel had become the steady, loving presence we both needed in our lives. She was also very pregnant with our son. The day Sarah was released, I knew what would come when she returned home. Honestly, I'd filed for divorce based on abandonment and the fact that my wife was in prison in a foreign country, listing the charges. My lawyer handled everything with me, just going to his office to sign some paperwork and making one trip to see a judge. The courts granted my divorce without any fuss. I don't even know if Sarah was informed. I assume she was, but I know that I didn't tell her. As a matter of fact, the only time we spoke was when she demanded I do something about her situation. It just took a few months and a quick meeting with a judge who approved the divorce. Part of me had expected her return to feel like a looming shadow, but the entire ordeal felt distant, like something that had happened in another lifetime. Thinking about it, it was almost 5 years until she came back to the States without any contact. I never even got a letter, phone call, or email from Sarah. I did hear from her mom, who wanted to see her granddaughter a few different times, but we shied away from talking about Sarah. Her mom had apologized to me early on when she found out what was going on along with some of the details. When she showed up at our new home, I wasn't surprised. I had prepared myself for this moment. I answered the door, Rachel beside me, and Emma was playing in the backyard. Sarah stood there, looking worn and fragile, like the years in prison had taken more from her than just time. To be candid, she looked like crap. Sarah commented that we had moved with a voice I didn't even recognize. I didn't even know where you lived anymore. I told her that we needed a fresh start after she left us. Her eyes were wet, and she was starting to tear up. Her eyes flicked to Rachel, standing beside me, and I could see the realization hit her like a tidal wave. I had moved on. I didn't wait for her. Our family wasn't hers anymore. You're remarried? She whispered, the words barely audible. I nodded again. Yes. Emma's happy. We're all happy. I was surprised that her mom hadn't told her that I'd remarried. Tears welled up in her eyes and she started crying. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Not quite. But almost. She croaked out something like, how could you do this? I thought we could fix things when I got out. I shook my head and felt closure wash over me. I told her, there's nothing left to fix, Sarah. You made your choices. And so did I. She broke down then, sobbing on my doorstep, the weight of everything crashing down on her all at once. I didn't feel angry anymore. It was just a detached sadness for the woman she had once been and the life we had once shared. I had gotten full custody of our daughter. Eventually, Sarah and I worked out a schedule for her to see Emma, but I insisted that the first few visits be with a family counselor to be supervised visitations. After a few months, Sarah settled in at her mom's, a few hours away. She did come into town, and I allowed Emma to go to her grandmother's place, where Sarah was staying. I'm anticipating Sarah taking me to court to win back some of her rights, like official visitation, but that's a problem for another time. I found my wife, Rachel, whom I adore, and our lives have been amazing for the last couple of years. I'm happy and healthy, and Emma is excited to have a little brother soon.
I only post new and unique content. Please like and subscribe.